I'm Dane Rose, and I want to talk about what has been one of the most painful sources of relational trauma in my life, and it's attachment trauma. And it fits within the psychological paradigm of attachment theory, uh, but I'll explain it in my own language here. When an infant is born, uh, the single most important thing to occur in the maturation process, other than physical survival, is a secure emotional attachment with preferably both parents, but certainly one parent, the mother. And in this phenomena, the child bonds emotionally using the template of the mother's relationship with herself and the relationship with the child to learn emotional regulation. This is the volatility of emotion, the response of emotion, the volatility of sensation, the response to sensation, the expression and understanding of the child's need, physiologically and emotionally, and the mother's response to that need. Now, if you think of attachment like a bell curve, or as any energy flow as a bell curve, when you have a gentle gradient in synchronization, this could be a gentle gradient of emotion, meaning I feel neutral, now I feel a little bit irritated, now I feel very irritated, or a little bit more irritated, then very irritated, then angry, then frustration, and way up at the top there you have, for example, an expression of rage, and it's on a gradient. And when this occurs in the expression of the mother, when this occurs, there is a chance for attunement. Meaning, for example, if the infant is the source of the emotional response, then maybe the infant kicks themselves, or kicks the mother, and there's a little bit of irritation, and then the baby kicks again, and there's more irritation, and the baby kicks again, and there's more, and those 3 points of connection, kick, more, a kick, some more, and a kick, even more, provides the data points for a trend. This allows a correlation where the infant gradually learns to regulate themselves through the impact they have on the mother, on the parent. And so in the experimentation and learning, the soul, the spirit is learning how to navigate in this body. First of all, that's the first exploration. It's like, what happens when I do this? What's that? Is that sharp? All of this kind of thing. So, if I open my mouth and go like this, what happens? So there's the learning of the regulation inside the self. But often there's a lot of unconsciousness. And so the learning comes from the feedback with the primary environment, the primary caregivers around. And then the baby doesn't kick, and mom's irritation goes down, and doesn't kick some more, and it goes down even more. And it's like, oh my goodness, I have this ability to influence mother. I can bring her anger up, I can bring it down again, and I know how it works because there are these gradient points. And it's very important to be aware that for the infant, The parent is God, is goddess, is all that is. The parent is a giant. The parent is life and death. The parent then is a figurehead of trauma. That phenomena in the physiology of a human being that lets the human being know my life is in danger or it is not in danger. There's a sense of this traumatic activation in the body is triggered when there is the sense that I could die because of this person. And that sense is present whenever there is a large discrepancy in force. For example, in Tiananmen Square, when the individual walked up and walked in front of the tanks, the sanity of the individual looking at something that's weighing many tons with military firepower is saying, the sanity is saying, I could be killed. The tank could roll over me. The tank could shoot me. I could be put in prison. There is an awareness of one's life being in danger because of the extraordinary juxtaposition of power, the extraordinary juxtaposition in scale of force. When an infant is completely dependent on an environment, there is a profound awareness of, just how big this gap is. Mom is a giant. She's not someone like the child. And so in that environment, there is this need to partner, this need to attune. Meaning if you can attune to that energy, you have life. You have liberation. You have a protector provider. If you cannot attune to that energy, you have death. If you need food and the protector provider doesn't want to give you food, you're dead. If you need help and the protector provider doesn't know that you need help and so doesn't attune to that help, or is just busy and tired and says, I'll get to the baby later. There is an awareness in this endless moment of time. There's an awareness. This could be death. This could be death. And so it is, in this sense, the larger force, the larger energy, the parent attuning to the infant, to the child, that must occur for the art of regulation, social regulation to occur. Because the child cannot attune to the extreme amplitudes that somebody 5, 10, 20 times bigger than them, with way more skills and coordination and resources, they can't attune to that. It's not a playful type thing where if mom jumps on the baby and does a karate chop, says, here's what mom can do, that the baby has the agility to get out of the way. Instead, it is for the mother to attune to the infant, to the child. It is for the mother to attune to the child and connect at an intensity that communicates to the child, I see you. I see that you're smaller than me. I understand your need, and I will bow to you. I will serve you by adjusting to your amplitude, by adjusting to your rhythm, rather than demanding that you adjust to mine. Now, we understand that in transportation, pedestrians have the right of way. And of course, the reason is obvious, because if someone in a Hummer decides they're not going to stop when someone's crossing the road, the Hummer doesn't sustain that much damage around the impact, and the driver in the Hummer does not sustain any physiological damage whatsoever. The pedestrian may be paralyzed, may be dead, may be driven over and crushed a leg, because there's a discrepancy in scale. And so what's being said is, a person cannot get out of the way of a 65-mile-an-hour car. A person can't leap high enough, but the driver can put on the brakes. The driver can steer around. The driver can look what's happening with the pedestrian and slow down, etc., etc. And so the superior mass in a healthy, growing relationship adjusts and attunes to the smaller mass, the superior force, the superior speed. The bigger adjusts to the smaller. And when you have that type of relationship, it's similar in a walk. If you have a friendship and you are the faster walker, you're 6'1", your walking companion is 4'2". You've got good muscles, they're out of shape, whatever. If you want to go on a walk in such a relationship, the faster person slows down to the comfortable space or comfortable pace of the slower person. Otherwise, the longer you walk, the further away that you get. And so there is an innate expectation in the exuberance of the infant, in the exuberance of the child. There's an innate expectation that I am important. In many ways, the child is the world. The entirety of their world. They're discovering this body, etc. There's the sense that I matter, that I am everything, and there's an innate expectation that that which is around will attune to the child. And of course, the incredible self-centeredness of a child to, it's just, open your eyes and there's all these moving objects around, etc. It's completely self-absorbing. I mean, there's just so much stimulation and learning about that. And so there's a lot of self-centeredness as part of that stage of development. Now, the challenge in this process comes when one or both parents do not have this gentle bell curve with their feelings or responses. And so a healthy human being who is emotionally literate operates on this gentle bell curve. It's much like a healthy bank. If you withdraw a dollar is deducted from your account. It's not I'd like $10 and then suddenly $2 million is handed to you and your account is closed, or you get nothing. You get the amount that you're inputting. I'd like this amount. I'd like the touch to be a little bit stronger. Could you move a little bit faster? Could you slow down a little bit? Don't shout quite so loud. It's too much for me. And so in a healthy relationship, each person has the full bell curve available to them as a gradient. It's not black or white. In the severe effects of trauma, however, there is a dissociation that occurs. The individual dissociates from themselves in a domain in the psyche. And that domain is cocooned around it's surrounded by a fight, flight, freeze biology that is not very well attuned. In many ways, it's partitioned. it's dissociated, meaning the conscious mind around a traumatic arena in the psyche, around a traumatic episode, doesn't connect with the charged energy, highly charged energy within that cocoon. And as a result, they have a regulation blind spot, meaning, when the person who broke your heart, who cheated on you with your best friend, who beat you and humiliated you and da-da-da-da-da, when they come into the room, and this is unresolved trauma, there's not a gradual, gradient in a sense of, am I in danger in this particular moment? It's not in the present, for one, and it's not gradual. There's a physiological reactivity that is often extreme. It's often in the fight or flight or freeze. I can't move. And it's not in the control of the conscious mind to regulate because it has been dissociated or disowned. So it is reactive in kind of an all or nothing movement. You see nothing and then suddenly there's an explosion. Now, the infant is, of course, completely oblivious of this. But in a traumatically ignorant culture, where traumas are caused all the time, when traumas are re-triggered all the time, and when no one, just ask yourself, how many people do you know, or do you know how to, if you're in that state, how to deal with it effectively and scientifically, meaning with a predictable way of creating ease and healing in that environment, as opposed to reenacting the trauma, because all abuse, all violation, all severe pairings of unregulated energy, which is what abuse is. Because, if I touch you like this in the way that you like to be touched, it's not abuse. If I touch you like this, when you're in a relaxed state, it is abuse. It's a shock because I'm not regulating the force. There's a pairing of energy that is unregulated. That's what violation, that's what violence, that's what trauma is, that's what shock is. It's a coming together of two energies so out of sync, so unregulated, that there is a sense of profound dissociation, disorientation, disconnection, overwhelm, and an inability to respond. And this in and of itself, this dysregulated state, this dis-ease, becomes, when it's not answered immediately and repaired, becomes a new threat. Because if I'm in a disoriented, shocked, stunned place, and I'm in motion, I'm in life, moving emotionally, physically, relationally, etc., but I'm not in the place to be able to navigate. Think of taking a baseball bat to someone in a NASCAR. You whack them over the head, and the car is still moving at 140 miles an hour. Now, the shock and the dissociation separates the conscious mind or the ego from an overwhelming energy, from an overwhelming pain, the pain of dysregulation. We all long, we all desire a sense of attunement. We long for attunement. And so when there is violence in a place that could be, that we long for attunement, when there's violence where we long for attunement, the ego separates to manage the pain. But in the act of separation, of dissociation, from the present moment in which the pain is occurring. We can be like that NASCAR driver who goes into shock and separates because we've hit them over the head with a baseball bat. But in the separation, further damage can be done because they can't steer a car at 200 miles an hour while they're not in their body. And similarly, when we are hit over the head with a betrayal, with, such an unregulated energy, it's like we want to be told what's going on. We want to be included in our partner's desires and thoughts. We want to be considered. And when they do the exact opposite, lie, don't tell us that they're lying, betray, do the exact opposite in that invisible state, do a number of things that are the exact opposite of what we need and want. And all of that energy hits us. And it's so disorienting. Well, we're in the middle of a dinner conversation. Most people that are ignorant enough to engage in that kind of violence are not sophisticated enough to present their violation at the right time for us. Most people don't sleep with your best friend, lie about it, steal your money, and then say, when would be a good time to shock you with some very painful news? Or when would be a good time for a difficult subject? Let me present it to you in just the right way when you can fall apart and it's not going to ruin your career, for example. Because the person who is at the level of sophistication that would engage in that kind of betrayal is not at the level of sophistication that would then present the betrayal at a good time. Because if they were that considerate and sophisticated, they wouldn't have done the betrayal in the first place. And so it's kind of a catch-22. So the people who are going to hurt you the most or traumatize you the most are likely then to present it at the worst possible time, which means you're in motion. You're in life's flow. And it's not a good time to be knocked out of your body by a pain pull out of the rug under, it's like, I don't want the rug pulled out from under me when I'm in this state. Now, this then leads to a secondary trauma. The trauma of the damage we cause to our own life when we're in this dissociated state, the state of shock or fear and, oh my gosh, what's going on? And then someone else, who of course doesn't understand the trauma in a trauma-illiterate culture, then takes that personally. So you just saw your partner with your best friend and kissing in the parking lot, etc. You're in an engagement with someone. And, particularly in a psychologically immature culture, the dissociation, the anger, the grimace, isn't interpreted with the person you're with as being about the fact that you've been betrayed. It's taken about them. Oh my gosh, they're grimacing, they don't like me. And so they then respond to that, which is then not what you wanted to happen, but it's out of your control again when you're in this domain of trauma. You don't get to control when the person betraying you is going to betray you. You don't get to control when they're going to present it. And then you don't get to control how the people around you experience your reaction to the trauma and betrayal. And you don't get to do a redo in a trauma-illiterate culture where they say, oh, that was, of course, I'm going to give you the contract for the $1 million job, even though I thought you were very rude to me and blah, blah, blah. I'm going to, you don't get to do that redo. And it happens so fast. And this, and this can spiral out, out of control. And what tends to happen then in a repression, trauma, illiterate culture is then we go into fearing our reaction, our feelings, and feeling like they are the problem. the problem is the environment that is producing so much violation on so many levels without the skill to repair. That is the problem, and that problem is cultural. But the coping mechanism is I'm not going to feel. I'm not going to let myself feel and engage emotionally to a point where someone could traumatize me emotionally, and to the point where I would then react to the trauma and destroy, in the self-centered reactions of those around me, destroy then other aspects of my life and feel helpless, and then in a trauma-illiterate culture and an emotionally illiterate culture be shamed for those feelings and blamed. Why did you ruin the business deal? Why did you just, fuck up the dinner party? It's not, why does the dinner party not know how to respond to trauma? Why do we have, quote, friendships where nobody knows really what's going on, and they don't know that they're not going on, and so someone can, quote, fuck up a dinner party, meaning, that they can have a reaction to someone else's action that no one understands, because the intimacy, the transparency, the vulnerability in the whole social gathering is so fragile, is based on so many projections, that nobody understands what's going on, and nobody even understands how big the gap is between the projections and the reality, and so it just falls apart. But when you're the one in pain, when everyone is misunderstanding you, when no one knows how to repair the damage, the shame, the pain then goes inward, because the individual cannot attack the entire group. They may feel like it, and it might be healthy to say, look at this, you fuckers. Why did no one tell me this affair was going on? Why did none of you understand? This is not about you. I grimaced because my partner cheated on me. Why did none of you ask what this was? Why are you now avoiding me? Because I'm pissed at the level of stupidity in this group of friends. Why is nobody dealing with this? More importantly, why aren't you understanding that this can happen to you? This is not personal to me. This is a function of this level of emotional immaturity, of this level of psychological illiteracy, in a culture that wants to go around associating alcohol and small talk with friendship, because you have a good time some of the time, but no one knows what's going on, and no one knows that they don't know what's going on, because we're that fucked up and ignorant as a culture. Why isn't it bothering you that this may happen to you in 2 years in this same circle of friends? And looking at the systemic design causes behind that. You see, this is, a very intelligent question. But when people are so ignorant that they don't know that they're ignorant, it's not a question that gets met with well, because they're ignorant. And in a shame-based culture where ignorance is shameful, why do men in the stereotype say, "Oh, I knew that. I knew that already. Don't tell me where to go. I know. I'm not going to ask for direct." Why? Because we shame ignorance, and so we go through these just amazing dramas where nobody will admit that they don't know what they don't know, because they don't want to be looked down on. Because among our many cultural ignorances, we actually reward people for getting away with pretending that they knew something more than we reward people for asking questions that bring the obvious up. Not only do I not know this, nobody knows this. Not only do you not know this, nobody knows this. It's not personal. Get out of your whole, the child self-absorption and deal with the fact that this ignorance wasn't invented by you. It's not your fault. It's a systemic intergenerational pattern. And you don't have to take the full blame for it. You didn't do it all. And the fact that I'm the only one talking about it or making you aware of this ignorance is not all about me. Meaning you're still ignorant of your ignorance if I don't bring it up. It's just maybe because no one else is bringing it up, you're more comfortable in the ignorance of your ignorance in a culture that shames you for not knowing. And so, we have this dynamic where regardless of what would be optimal, I mean, what would be the best thing that could possibly happen in the situation would be that the system that produced the series of violations and betrayals would be explored, would become conscious, and the system could evolve. That's the highest form of intelligence in such a situation, and that healing and repair could occur and all the relationships would grow stronger. But this is not what happens. When the individual says, you don't get it, and they just don't invite you to the party again. So now, in addition to sabotaging that particular interaction, dealing with the trauma of betrayal, you're now isolated at the very time when you need the most love and healing and support for the traumatic incident. And what this does on a systemic level is it leads grown-ups, we're not really adults until we become emotionally literate and connected with ourselves and our spirit and who we are as a being. But as grown-ups, we learn that in this particular system, one of the best safeguards is to shut down feelings and to navigate with our head. Because if we're doing that, we won't respond in shock to this and that, or not that much, and we will not betray our feelings. We've already betrayed our feelings, really, but we will not let anyone else see our feelings. We'll control our facial expressions to do the things so that when our partner betrays us with our best friend, etc., we'll still continue the witty story at the dinner table. We'll still be invited back. No one will be any the wiser that we're ripping apart inside and stuff. And then we will feel composure. We will feel a substitution for maturity, a substitution for adulthood, by saying, well, at least I looked good while my emotions were going to shreds. All this stuff is going on. And I maintained face. As much more as really the best you can hope for in a culture such as this. So when you create a culture that goes through that pattern repetitively, then of course the most originally vulnerable and emotional people are then betrayed into the darkest shadow side of the cult, of the culture, by experiencing the most pain as a result of being the most open and trusting. So they'll often flip from there being, I don't know how to be less, I'm just going to shut everything down. So now they're in survival mode. It's a coping mechanism. I don't know how to deal with this. People around me don't know how to deal with this. People around me don't know how to repair this. Let's just shut it all down. So now we've got a flat line. We've taken many of these emotions and we've flatlined them. Thank goodness, I'm in control now. I now have a sense of agency, and the griefs and stuff, I'll just drink them away, I'll just drug them away, I'll just get busy and make lots of jokes and have addictive sex and whatever, and I'll just just keep moving. And it's all this pattern of managing emotion. Now, my mother was such a person. She dissociated, numbed out, was very vacant. So it's like, where are you, Mom? Where are you to connect with? And she was committed. Like I'm assuming, learned that the safest point is to be unconscious of everything she's feeling so that she could kind of engage with her fantasy, because she had control of her fantasy. And so she lived, somewhat in that world, and, it was just kind of a vacant off there. And of course, every child needs and wants attention. And so I would pull for attention, and I'd get, I'd get this vacancy, and I'd pull for some more, and I'd get vacancy, and I'd pull for some more, and I'd get vacancy. Then I'd pull for some more, and then suddenly she would turn in a rage at this full intensity towards me. And what she was really saying is, fuck you, you goddamn son of a bitch. You have broken through my defenses. You've gotten me in touch with my feelings. I can't manage my feelings around you. I hate you. You're a threat. I'm going to die if you keep bringing up these feelings. I've got to put these feelings away from me. So she discharged that hate, and then as quickly as possible, she'd go back to flatline again and ignore and pretend the whole thing never happened. So there wasn't any possibility to express repair, because then she would forget about it, and she'd be done, and I'd be left in shock. Like, I wanted attention. Now I've gotten unregulated violence, and then back to nothing. Well, this is a terrifying thing to discover as a child, because it's like, how do you regulate with that? The one is too big, and the other is non-existent. How do you can't form an emotional connection with rage or invisibility. Rage, invisibility. And I remember tippy-toeing up to those lines. It was like the most scary thing imaginable. I want attention, but I don't want the rage. Is there any way that I can fiddle with this on-off switch? It's like nothing and then flood. It's like parched thirst and then swept away in the rapids. It's like, I want a drink. Swept away in the rapids, desert. It's all or nothing. Now, this is represented, geometrically. You got a nice gradient to off and on, and it doesn't matter what it is. Food, no food, stuffed to your guts and too much food, etc., starving. Attention, complete focused attention at an overwhelming intensity, 1,000 people all looking at you under the spotlight, and then no one's looking at you and paying attention. Whatever it is, you've got these extremes, and for the adult, they're always 5 to 10 times more intense than they are for the infant. Meaning a healthy adult that's in control of this process is going to discharge energy at 5 to 10% of, or 20% of their capacity, understanding that, much like, you have a power station and it's for powering a city. Well, you don't plug your cell phone into, the 200 or the 400 volt, 2,000 amp power station. The whole cell phone explodes. That's violation. That's violence. No, you want your little 5 volt, 0.5 amps, 1 amp, to slightly, because the cell phone is very small and it's got a little battery in there and you can, burn the whole thing up. So it's, you need power, but you don't need to fry the phone, and so in that situation, a child needs to be able to be around people that have a gradient and that grasp this principle of scale, because many grown-ups are so oblivious of their own childhood, are so unconscious in the trauma of childhood, that they have no real sense of what it was like to be 2 years old, to be 1 year old. So they project, in the self-absorption of grown-up children, they project what they want as 30-year-old giants onto what they think a 1-year-old would want, what they would want if they put their brain, etc., into a 1-year-old. So they pat the 1-year-old on the back at, at an intensity that, if it was you and me, it would be like a 30-foot giant with a huge hand just whacking us on the back. It's bad enough the way jocks do it in the United States, like, oh, my good old buddy. Those are two scales, and it's like, do we have to hit each other? I mean, do we have to compete to whack each other over the back? It's irritating, but it's not traumatizing. Well, that same, thing for a 1-year-old is traumatizing. It tells the biology of the young one, these people don't see me. These people don't know me. These people haven't a clue, and I'm depending on them. Oh my gosh. If I'm depending on these people, and they don't and they can't even tell the difference between a 2-year-old's body and a 30-year-old's body, my goodness, I'm not sure I can make it. And this is, huge source of anxiety and panic, because if they don't do at least a modicum of a decent job, you're dead. It's not like you're going to call in social services, or you don't even know they exist. So there's this tremendous panic. And then there's also this loneliness, because when you have to decide between this violent surge or nothing, when possible, I go with nothing. But there's this ache, there's this emptiness. I need, I desperately need presence. I desperately need love. I desperately need someone to connect with. I'm all alone here in this void, and it is painful. It is so scary and painful and lonely and uncomfortable, and these ridiculous clothes you're shoving me in that you think are so cute. Oh my goodness, it's horrible. It's horrible. It's hellish. And of course, if you scream at mama, if you've got an immature mother, then they just punish you. And, when these giants get angry at you, you ugly thing and whatever, you're ruining my life. It's like, oh my gosh. It's again, the gods are angry. The goddesses could kill me. They're mad at me. And this, of course, it is the traumatization in a trauma-illiterate culture that innately leads to the projection of violent, giant, vengeful, all-powerful deities that could give a shit about you. I mean, if you look through a lot of the mythology, you don't find that many of the gods and goddesses in mythology worrying about people's feelings, because parents are not worrying about the child's feelings. And you don't have them gently explaining things to people. I mean, you can go through, any number of the 2,000 to 4,000 year old gods and goddesses, and the number of gods that are sane and act like decent parents, protector providers, and say, here's the best way to talk to me, and I don't like this because it hurts my feelings, but I'm the big one, I'm the deity, and so I'll protect you. It's not your job to protect me and placate my ego and all that. I will protect you. It's like, wait a minute, that's not how gods work, because that's not how grown-ups work. And so the grown-up is the first projection of the deification. That's who I'm becoming. And the deity is always the expected future and the longing. And so when you've got violent, disruptive, jealous, vengeful parents, who shout at you if you don't do exactly what you're told, well, then suddenly you've got an Old Testament God or an Allah or whatever. And it's like, well, that's just what gods do, isn't it? Because they're God, and that's what they do. And they're terrifying. That's the terror of the gods. Burn me in hell for eternity. Where does that come from? My parents will hate me forever if I spill some milk, who knows what it is. And so there's this terror, and of course the giants, the grown-up children are completely oblivious to most of it. They don't understand that these glares, particularly to an infant, it's all about the infant. Every time the child, the parent grimaces like that, child's like, what did I do? Am I going to be burned, for all eternity, banished, hated, whatever? And so these traumas come in, and then the self-absorbed parent, don't look like that, or I'll hit you, or whatever, and don't respond to me like this. I don't want, and I'm not going to learn to treat you the way you'd like to be treated. It's your job to enjoy being abused. And if you can't enjoy it, keep it to yourself. I don't want to see it on your face. Stop crying. Cut that out. It's like, oh my gosh, my feelings are going to get me killed. I can't learn regulation. I can't connect. Now they like me. I have no idea why. Of course, it has nothing to do with the infant. They got a raise that day. Someone they were attracted to was interested. They had an affair, and so they're happy today. And so suddenly, why is this going on? Why are you a human being today and an ogre tomorrow? Or they weren't drinking that day. So I don't know how to respond to this. The terror of the child. And so when you have a parental relationship with one or both parents, in my case it was both parents, could not connect emotionally in very large portions of their reality, and weren't able to be present, there's this on-off switch that is associated with too much off and too much on. It's not one way or another. And this creates what's called an insecure attachment dynamic. There's no security in the attachment, meaning there's no confidence whatsoever that the bigger energy will regulate to the smaller energy. Maybe it'll kill you today, maybe it won't. Maybe it'll force food into your mouth when you don't want to eat. Maybe it'll starve you when you're hungry. I'm hungry. Shut up. Now eat your food. I'm not hungry. Eat it. Like, what do I do? And then the outburst is like, cut it out, you parents, stop it. Like, don't you talk to your parents. And so the giants are shouting. The gods and goddesses, are shouting. So, this created extraordinary amounts of terror, loneliness, exhaustion from the terror. The adrenals just running, exhaustion. Hyperactivity and collapse. Running frantically, trying to move out of that anxiety. What do I have to do so I don't feel so terrified and trapped in my body? Dissociation from my body. Then in the dissociation, of course, violating my siblings, violating my parents' boundaries, violating my own boundaries. I'm in a dissociated state. Then the unregulated violence, beatings, hittings, shoutings, coming back at me, which of course doesn't lead to regulation. It leads to more dissociation, more dysregulation, more violation, and it's this endless circle. And then I started watching the sadistic dance of humiliation. So, we shame men for being helpless in our culture. Because real men, they know everything. That's why real men don't, of course, ask for directions or anything like that. Real men know everything. And they're not helpless. They always know what to do, and they do it, and it works. And that's why they get loved. That's a good man, useful, If they are helpless, and they don't know anything, and they're overwhelmed, etc., then they get hated, often by women, often by, peers, then humiliate them and punish them and stuff. And every child in a dysfunctional family reveals at some level, like no sane parent can look at their own behavior and their own family without being aware that they don't know what the hell they're doing. And And yet they can go out in the world and get by. They can talk sports. Oh, did you hear the Yankees won? Well, I did too. We both know that. We know everything. It's wonderful. You get to do that, and you get to learn how to shuffle paper in an office, and I did that and did that well. I shuffled 10,000 bits of paper this month, and my boss said I shuffle paper better than anyone else. You come home, and it's like your child brings up shame, and you don't know how to deal with shame. That fucking child. I don't know anything. I don't know what I'm doing. And there's anger because I'm now feeling exposed to, like I'm not lovable in a cult that tells me I'm only lovable like this. And so there's a lot of anger that comes, from, like, if I try and get my father to feel something, and he didn't know how to deal with that, because, of course, he dealt with all this in his childhood. He was emotionally about 6 years old. But if he could interact in these other domains, like real mature people making money in hedge funds and all this, then, then he could know everything, right? But not here, and so there's this sense, go away, you're bad, I don't like. And of course the child reads all those facial expressions and says, I'm unlovable, my father hates me, my father's scared of me, my father doesn't want me close, I can't connect with him, I'm completely alone, I'm all alone, I'm ashamed. It's all about me because, every child makes it all about them. So these are incredibly painful energies. And it gets so painful for a child, they dissociate, they go numb. They blank out. The breakers switch. And regions of the child's psyche become as dysfunctional as the regions in the parent's psyche. Disconnected from self, disconnected from feelings, not learning any of those key regulations in those blanked out areas, which then leads to violation. Because when you're tuned out, when you don't know how to manage this state in yourself, you can't then empathize and extrapolate and relate to other people. So when you're around healthy, normal people, they do exist apparently, then you have blanked out. It's like pockets of the eyes just don't see something. So you walk into those objects that are in the blind spots. And then people react to that. They don't say, oh my gosh, you were a traumatized child. Of course, how can I help? They say, why do you walk into that? What? It's like, oh my gosh, I have no idea. I didn't see it. What are you talking about? What do you mean what I'm talking about? You mean you don't know? You're one of those shameful people who don't know? It's like, okay, I'm going to avoid this interaction. And there's just this endless buffeting, and then finally my father started humiliating anyone who would make him feel anything. And the way he did that was by taking all of his helplessness and terror and rage at himself and all those parts of his own emotions he didn't know how to deal with, and directed that at his children and wife to a point where they all felt terrified, small, lonely, hurt. And the more they would cry, etc., the more pleased he was, because now they're feeling his feelings. And so he doesn't have to deal with them. Now it's your problem. It's like, I don't have any feelings about this. So his whole system was to transfer everything that he felt ashamed of using superior mass and technology and his decently built mind to construct these torment cells. He was quite perceptive and so able to see how to really stick it in the most painful areas, so that the emotions were always louder around him than coming out of his mouth. Now, if you asked him what he felt, he probably couldn't answer the question. He could talk for 45 minutes about how he didn't feel anything and why that wasn't important and blah, 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 blah. But he couldn't actually say anything about what he felt, because that's in part of that pocket. So I learned that my feelings took me into this endless pit, because the more I felt, the more my father would torment me. The more he tormented me, the more I felt. The more I felt, the more he would torment me. And so the only way was flatline. I developed a poker face to stop my father from entering in and churning, eliciting those feelings. And of course I felt rage and resentment, because at some level I knew he was a coward, that he was asking his children and his wife to do what he didn't have the courage and willingness to do. And that's a pretty cowardly thing. When you try and look up to someone and say, hey, Dad, I want to be like you, and you're a coward, and you're so cowardly you can't even admit you're a coward, and you're ganging up on people. You're ganging up on my younger siblings now that I'm older? Now that I'm old enough that you can't trounce? Now you're ganging up on my 6-year-old brother? That's your definition of, great fatherhood and all that. And then, of course, he couldn't admit any mistakes. And so, there was never any apology or anything, because that would suggest he might have made a mistake. And, of course, that's also impossible when you know everything and do everything and all that in the shame-based culture. So it's like it's so pathetic to begin with. It's so cruel and pathetic, and it's puzzling. And then you can't even admit it. And then you need to be superior. It's not only do you become the lowest of the low, but you're going to use your superior mass to bully everyone to agree that you're the best. A little bit like Donald Trump, it's like, and it's like you're so weak. You're so weak. You need your children, after a good beating, to tell you how great you are. Because otherwise you might feel bad that you beat your fucking kids. You can't even sympathize with them after your brutality. You need them to sympathize with you, or you will punish them for not doing that. And how long, just how deep do you go in that particular endless tailspin? How many lies, how many denials, how much cruelty, and how much continual extraction? This is a very, very deep wound in an emotionally illiterate culture, because how do you begin to feel any of that when, as soon as you have the integrity to speak your feelings, you get extra punishment from a coward who you love because he's your dad? It's a difficult dynamic. Unable to bond with either parent, I dissociated and went numb. But of course, in romantic relationships, you can't navigate a passionate romantic relationship from numbness. And so I had to go into my feelings. The trouble is, when you have a lifetime of on-off, and that's all you've been able to internalize, because that's your parents, that's your template. Their behavior becomes your template. It's not conscious, by the way. It's not like I said, I think I would like to grow up to be someone who has an on-off template. It's not like I would like to be either numb or desperately needy. No, this happens almost before language. So now suddenly, I discover, as I fall in love, that I go from numb to completely on and very needy, very insecure and very needy. Now, if at that point one of two things would happen, I would either be rejected, or the person would meet me there. Or the worst thing of all would be a maybe, and then left hanging. Because what happens is when you have an on-off template that's kind of black or white, the center, this is kind of a representation of my psyche. I can stay centered in an off position or in a full-on position. But when I'm anywhere in between that, this centered pattern takes my consciousness and directs it towards this completely unregulated, off the charts, all over the place, violent energy that I received. So, unable to connect with my parents emotionally, part of me went insane. In the violence, emotionally and physically, part of me went insane. Unconscious, unregulated, uncharted, unverbalized, erratic, unregulated energy. That's called insanity. If you talk with someone and their sentences wander up and down, their body wanders around, and you cannot make the connections, you say that person is crazy. Meaning, they have a pattern that I can't track. Well, when that moves into a traumatic terrain, the infant, the child, cannot track the energy they have partitioned for survival. So it is crazy. It's a car without a steering wheel. There's no driver in there because it's been pushed into the unconscious at intense volumes, at high speeds. Like, get out of here. Whatever goes on, that car crashes, it drives around. It's got no driver. It's intense, terrified, lonely, miserable energy that will be punished if it integrates. Because the parent, the abuser, doesn't want to deal with the shame of the abuse. And so it's got to be denied to protect the face of the abuser in the abuser's own eye, so that the abuse survivor will not be further abused in this endless cycle. Because a shame-based person will abuse you, and then they'll deny it, and as part of their denial, they need you to participate in the cover-up. Because if you speak out about the fact that you really hurt me, that I'm going to be dealing with this in therapy and blah, 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 and that bullshit, and I feel so lonely and desperate, they will understand how fucked up they are. If they understand how fucked up they are, that's going to lead them back to childhood traumas and stuff that they promised. Every deep abuse survivor that goes, in a culture that doesn't repair, has one vow as you move into adolescence. I am never, ever going to feel that way again. No one is going to make me feel that way. They get along, they learn how to have meaningless sex, whatever it is, look cool, they buy the right brands of clothing, they're doing quite well. They get a child, and suddenly they have vowed no one's going to make them feel that way again. And here's this 2-year-old making them feel that way. And it is disorienting, and they don't know what they're doing, of course. They just know they're in danger because it reminds them their life could end. Because now they're feeling feelings again. It nearly killed them when they were a child, and so, my goodness. And this fear, the child sees it. And the child may block their own flow out of pity or out of fear for making the parent, I don't want the gods to be afraid of me, and hurt me. And so there's all kinds of body language things that go on completely unconscious in a parentally illiterate culture where, you don't get 4 years of parenting course. An intelligent culture would study 4 years of parenting long before it would study 4 years of algebra. Because parenting actually matters. When's the last time you did algebra? But we're not an intelligent culture. We're an inane, chauvinistic, traumatically illiterate culture that is so shame-based that we don't have the guts to admit it. But here's these 2-year-olds pointing it out every day, and it's like, I don't want the neighbors to know what I do to my kid. Oh, my goodness. Now I'm afraid of the neighbors. I'm now afraid of my neighbors because of you, kid. If you hadn't been born, then, I wouldn't be behaving in these strange ways, and I wouldn't be afraid of people finding out. And so this codependency is like, these fucking kids, I can't kill them because then the neighbors will put me in prison or something, and I can't shout too loudly, except, in their home. And how am I going to hurt these kids and let them know how miserable they made me feel? And I'm a bad person. I've got to hide that feeling, but I'm going to get them in some little covert way, like leaving them in the car in a hot, day, and oh, I left you. I'm so sorry. Good. I'm glad you've felt some of the misery you put me through. And so there's this intense paranoia and shame and fear. I'm going to get punished, and all of that goes into the child. But the parents, in their kind of magnanimousness, my parents were hippies and very spiritual, of course, and so this can't be dealt with. This can't be. This is not what spiritual hippies do. So all of the abuse gets erased. Out of sight, out of mind, I'm clearing my head. The divine Shakti is coming through. You little children that are scared and angry, I'm just sending you love and light. Because all that can be done without feeling anything. It's a complete performance, like, oh, isn't it wonderful? And all the other hippies, of course, play right along. Oh, aren't you, you're so radiant and hippie-like. You've got the nice rainbow colors. And isn't it wonderful? And so, everyone's, and it's like, make me look good and I'll make you look good. And, we'll all conspire to make our children insane and not let them know that any of this is going on. And so it's completely, no. You don't talk to your parents. Don't talk to, aren't I a wonderful person? Don't do. And of course, a child learns pretty quickly how to manipulate this. You give little ego strokes to your child parent and they'll behave, and give them a little this, or you threaten to make them look bad in front of the neighborhood, and they'll give you an ice cream when you're not supposed to have it. And you learn. I don't have healthy parents that care about needs and principles and have discipline and self-control and regulation, all that. I've got terrified, shame-based parents, but at least now I know how to manipulate them, with their own fears and their own shames, and how to do it in a way that I get the lollipop but don't get slapped in the face. What's the line between when I'm sassy and when I'm making her look bad? And so there's this complete manipulative coping mechanism. You've shut down these feelings that are authentic and real because your parents are terrified of those. And if you're being manipulative and naughty, well, that's normal. Everyone says, well, that's just how kids behave. Well, why? Why do kids behave like that? Is it just innate human nature? Is that's just what they do, or could it be that the child is left saddled with generations of this abuse, and parents that don't have the decency to explain it to them and instead make them feel like it's all their fault, that they're just unlovable children, which is a very deep belief that I developed. I'm deeply bad and unlovable. Because one of the things, I was the eldest son, and so one of the of 5. So some of my first memories at like 4 or 5 years old, I'm abusing my 2-year-old sister. So I'm 4, she's 2, and some of my first memories are abusing her. So I know I'm a bad person, and with my parents adding to it by refusing to bond emotionally, by hating me for feeling, I know I'm a horribly unlovable person because I haven't been loved. And because my parents are pretending that everything they do is wonderful. But I can't pretend that even at 4 years old, I felt bad. Like I wake up, here I am, I'm me. What am I doing? Oh, I'm hurting my sister. that seems bad. Where's that coming from? I must be a bad person. As opposed to, wow, I was born perfect. I wonder how much damage had to have been done to me that even before I'm aware of myself, I'm hurting other people as my means of interacting. How much unregulated hurt had to have come in for me to learn that that's how people behave. But I'm carrying all the shame because my parents are perfect. And that's, to this day, if I express some of this to my mother, she wants to talk anthroposophy because she can stay, very politely in her head around that. I wonder what the lessons are for this lifetime. She can't deal with rage or terror, her own or anyone else's. And so there's this again, it's like, I don't, I'm invisible. And no matter what I say, it's this and that, and it's like, no, this question is not about past lives and blah, blah, blah. This is about you as a fucked up mother not being able to feel, not being able to be present, still not being able to ever put anyone else first, and not even being able to empathize with how they feel about it because you're so self-absorbed you don't realize you're self-absorbed. Empathic people become aware when they're self-absorbed. Self-absorbed people, they don't even know what are you talking about? Because that would mean, understanding the other person from their point of view. It's like it's a mysterious experience. And that self-absorption and fantasy world is part of a defense, part of an escape from the amount of what. It's my mother has been very resistant to understand what went on. I feel more empathy for her having met her father than she feels for her own little girl. I only met her father for 10 minutes, and I feel enormous empathy for her little girl. He creeped me out in 10 minutes. She grew up with him. She has no empathy for her little girl. This is not real. She's blocked that out to the same degree that she's blocked out all of her children. And all her children are trying to desperately figure out the code. What do I have to do to matter to mom? Well, you have to enter her fantasy world, and then you don't exist in the fantasy world. And then you can, you don't exist. You exist now in the fantasy world. So now mom is very happy because you've joined her in her fantasy. Now you're not real in the fantasy. Your fantasy is real. Her fantasy of you is real. And if you'll be that fantasy, then you get to exist. But you got to actually let go of who you are, because who you are is a threat to the fantasy. And that's insanity. And so all of that terrain, a lifetime of longing to love and be loved as I am, is in this unregulated, overwhelmingly sad, painful place. It's way too big to feel, in a culture in which I'm going to take a huge hit for breaking down into grief, for breaking down into rage, which are the feelings there: helplessness, grief, rage, loneliness, desperate need for empathy. And I'm surrounded by Americans who the best they can do when I talk about some of these feelings is they say, oh, that's very interesting. Sitting up here in my ivory tower, I can follow along the threads that you're speaking about. That's very interesting. Keep it up. Feel some more despair and loneliness, and let's see if we can correlate that with this or that past event, because I'm an American who doesn't understand empathy. So I can't grieve. I can't burst into tears and hold you, because that would be intelligent. and I'm an American. who likes Mr. Smiley Face and to talk about interesting ideas and to feel superior to the rest of the world, who's so uneducated, but who actually knows how to feel, which is why I travel abroad for a little bit of sanity. When I go into this place, in this in-between place, it is horrendous. My body starts tearing itself apart. I desperately try and hold on to something, and what I'm trying to hold on to is a yes or a no. What is it? I can't find this gradient that a healthy human being is gifted by their culture and their parents. Now, off, meaning I have nothing to do with you, or on, we have a very solid relationship. Both of those are preferable to the chaos and the uncertainty and the insanity of the unregulated, endless space. It's like I go into a dark void where there's no time, there's no end, there's no controls. I'm just helplessly suspended in overwhelming, horrific feelings until I get to a full-on or a full-off, which are the two set points that I've been able to track and that have been laid in my parental template. Now, in a culture such as ours, none of the girls that I've dated, none of the women, have been prepared for this. No one has studied attachment theory. No one says, well, of course, you're an American with hippie parents who blacked out. No one says this. They, of course, take it, pretend that it's about them. Or that I'm too needy or too distant or whatever it is. It's why don't you do this? It's like, God, I wish I could do that. Well, why don't you? You don't have any idea about this terrain, do you? What do you mean I don't know anything about this terrain? Are you saying that I don't know? Yes, I'm saying, well, let me tell you, and because the shame of not knowing. I don't want to look stupid by admitting I don't know what I'm doing here. So I'm going to bully you in your most sensitive terrain, pretend that I know, and then hurt you there. Because I don't know, but I'm not willing to admit it, because then I might have to go in. It's like, well, why don't you just change your ability to feel shame about that and just admit you don't know? Well, I do know. You're so afraid of your own shame, you can't even admit that you don't know. I can admit that I can't deal in this terrain, but you cannot accept in me my inability to regulate between these points. And you cannot accept that it has nothing to do with me. I've done $100,000 in therapy and counting. It hasn't helped one iota in this terrain. And the therapists don't know enough to know that they don't know that. Because that's the primary thing I need help with. And most of them haven't even articulated the terrain or proposed any solutions when I do. So we're dealing with an uneducated therapeutic body that, can take $100,000 to not know what they don't know. And then leave the shame of that on me. Because then I feel, of course, terrible. What's wrong with me? That all these therapists, I'm so fucked up that all these therapists couldn't help, and none of them could admit that they couldn't help. And none of them could acknowledge what they didn't know. So they want me to feel bad, because if I tell the therapist that I'm pissed at them, they get defensive. Meaning it's not okay with the therapists to hear that they don't know what they don't know. It's not okay, because then they might feel shame. But it's okay for them to say they're doing a great job, but I'm just not getting better. Because that means that I don't know how to do things, and it's expected. That's why you're paying me the bucks. You're fucked up and we're perfect, and so you're paying us to learn, but you're not doing a very good job. So carry the shame for the parents, carry the shame for the lovers, carry the shame for the therapist. And of course, there's always something there. You could say, sure, I'm sure there's a student level that even with traumatically illiterate therapists, even with therapists that don't ask the right questions or don't, that they would still learn anyway. They'd have an epiphany, they'd meditate, and there's the 1,000 hours of meditation. Meditation didn't solve it either, it's my fault. Because the meditation teacher surely couldn't have made any mistakes, but this hasn't shifted, in 1,000 hours of meditation. It didn't shift with the raw food diet, and it didn't shift with the this, and the think positive and have a new self-image. It didn't shift. So I'm doing it wrong 1,000 different times. And no one else is making any mistakes. They're all looking at me, asking me to lie, to tell them that they're great. But that means I don't exist. Because I'm desperately trying to find this terrain without the right language and technology in a trauma-illiterate culture that gets angry at me every time they're scared, every time they don't know something, every time I'm angry. And for much of my life, I haven't even been able to put this into words. So the common experience for me was be interested in someone, and they're interested. But, of course, they're scared from their own abuse history and all that. And so they want to go hesitantly, but I can't do hesitantly. So I push, can you come on, can you come on, can you hold this, can we get close, because I can do on. But they're scared. And I say, okay, I need to separate. I need to say goodbye, because I can do off. But now they're rejected. They don't want to do off. They don't want to do on. So I can't please them. I can't meet them where they're at. And nothing I can say can educate them about the horror of the loneliness, of the insanity, of the grief of the in-between. Or the fact that it's timeless and I have no, it's like being thrown into your deepest nightmares with no doors. The only thing I know I can get to is I can get to on or I can get to off. It's my only way out. And this is horrendous. This is a horrendous disability. Because 90% of all relationships should not, if I analyze the relationships analytically, they shouldn't be all on. And not that fast. And they shouldn't be all off. They should be somewhere on this gradient. But I can't do gradients. I understand the idea. I understand that the limitation is in my physiology. It's not in my mind. It's not like I don't know the thing to do. I literally start ripping my body apart. The pain that I'm in the in-between, is so intense that my entire day, within a matter of 24 hours, becomes coping and obsessing with the pain, which eliminates my functionality. Now, I have spent probably $100,000 in destroyed business to try and tolerate that pain, to accommodate other people and what they want. I'm never appreciated for that. It's a tremendous sacrifice. I do it for them. And they still blame me with zero compassion and understanding. If I can't do it anymore, I've got to go to on or off, and since you won't go to on, I don't care. I've got to turn this off now. Bing. I know that hurts you, but you don't understand that this hurts me. And you don't understand that you don't understand that. And that hurts me immensely because I'm going through shit and hell for another oblivious woman who is so oblivious she doesn't know she's oblivious. And I have not been given the language to communicate this well. The culture has not provided me with a context to introduce this at a good moment. And you're psychologically illiterate, courtesy of our culture. And so no one is seeing, as I go through agony upon agony, moment after moment in a timeless space. And I'm not going to rip my body and life apart to accommodate another person who doesn't know what they don't know, who thinks I'm cute. I could give a shit about sex. I could give a shit about cute. I could give a shit about anything. Nothing compares to that amount of pain. Nothing. So if you kind of like me because of my vibe, or you read one of my books, or you think this is a little bit cool, or you think I'm smart, go fuck yourself. I could give a shit about that. I would never put you in this amount of pain. And you are so insistent on your willful ignorance. There's no space. You don't ask, you don't make the time to talk, and you run away when I try and bring it up. You don't deserve this amount of loyalty and decency when you care so little about the person who cares so much about you. I understand how I'm going to hurt you because I'm not oblivious. Of course I know that going all on is a lot, particularly with my intensity. Of course I know that. And I'm willing to hear your feelings about that. And I'm willing to acknowledge that it's fast. And I'm willing to thank you for speeding up, and I'm willing to see you. And in many cases, after absolute agony in that in-between space with complete obliviousness, I have comforted the person I have left, I've shut down with. I've hung in there a little bit more in agony to make the landing more gentle for them. And I've created ending agreements that can do that gracefully in the time frame where I'm not in hell. And made sure that works for people. I've taken care of more than 100 people in this terrain. I've never met the woman who has taken care of me. I've never met the woman who saw me in this terrain, which is a very deep wound. It's a very deep form of loneliness. And so I luck out every now and again with a woman who goes into full-on rather naturally and is comfortable with herself. I date older women. My whole relationship strategy is defined by this weakest link. I can't be mid-range. I can't. And the grief that I have about that, I mean, my suicide, my regular desire to die directly ties in with this thing. Because I am guaranteed to be set up to be in this amount of pain again and again and again in this culture. It is inevitable. 1. I am guaranteed to be completely invisible in that amount of pain and to be attacked and shamed about 40% of the time if I have the courage to talk about it. And in the throwaway culture that we've developed around romance, almost always, if a woman realizes we're not going to be lovers, blah, 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 it's not working out, I'm not going to be her little boyfriend, she's discarding me. She's moved on. Well, we don't really need to talk about this. I get it. Then there's the whole painful dynamic of all the insecure women who pretend and project that the reason that I'm getting rid of them, because that's how they see it, it's all about them, of course, and so the reason that I'm getting rid of them is their breasts weren't big enough. I could give a shit about breasts. They weren't the. I could give a shit about your age, your money, your breast. I could give a shit about any of that. I would happily be there for you, regardless of any of that stuff. I don't care about your degrees, your political. None of that is worth putting you through a dumping or whatever. Only a soul-wrenching grief in complete isolation and loneliness where no one sees me, no one gets it, and no one honors the sacrifice is too much to take care of you. I'm a good guy. I'm not going to go through that moment by moment to protect the ignorance of your ignorance. Because you can't feel it? Where's your empathy? You can't feel it. I see you. You don't see me. You can't feel it. I don't know why. And if you do see it, it doesn't seem to matter to you. You're staying too much in your head around this amount of pain. It kills my body. And, I've lost about 4 years of my life, more recently when my therapist, Peter Sandhill, escalated a sexual relationship into this terrain, using the overwhelming force of psychedelics to push through my normal safety cautions here. And then he left me hanging in this space because he wouldn't talk about it and open or close it. He insisted on leaving it hanging here for months. And because I was near suicide at that time, and it was just from this grief of all this, it's like, if I can't find something to work, I'm going to die. So I tried everything to make that work. And, he's a therapist. I'm paying him money for this abuse, this whatever. He never asked about my needs or any of this. He kept explaining his own, how he was busy, how he couldn't talk, he didn't want to do it, this was better for him. Complete obliviousness. And it has taken 4 years off of my life. My body has aged at least 4 years. I will die 4 years sooner. And for many of those months and years, I wasn't sure if I'd live that year, the amount of pain that I was in. Because again, in his eyes, he's done nothing wrong. Just pushed his therapeutic client to overdose on substances against the client's wishes, escalated a romantic relationship, and then off he goes. No check-in, anything, this, that, the other. I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to talk about that. No refund, even after admitting, the abuse. It's as if the most horrendous grief of my entire life isn't worth a few $100s to the nut job capable of doing that with a willful ignorance that is astounding. And that is my life. That has been my life since my teens. People don't know. They don't know that they don't know. And they punish me, oblivious of their impact. And they get defensive and filled with whatever it is when I try and communicate who I am in this dynamic. Oh, I'd hate to think, I loved you. It's like, and I have to take care of them because they don't have the maturity to know that it is profoundly abusive to both sides, particularly in a paid therapeutic context, to ask your client to take care of your needs and negate their own, that you lacked the competency to listen to respect, to see on your own, and to not violate repeatedly for years. This has taken me to the edge of my sanity. It has taken me to the edge of life. It has taken me to the edge of grief. It has taken me to the edge of transcendence, because that is the nature of these very large unregulated energies. And it is an incredible cost that we pay as a culture for not seeing one another in this terrain. Once I enter this, chaotic state, a very solid, healthy relationship will contain the energy, and I can start building regulating templates within the relationship. I have to do it very, very consciously. I have to do with my mind what every infant does by the time of 5 without language. I've got to track everything with my mind consciously. I've got to take all that fucked up childhood code, and I've got to reconstruct what a template would normally just flow out. I've got to do that piece by piece, and it's like Lego for me. And it's stressful, it's hard work, there's thousands of little moments and pieces. And if I don't do that Lego work, I have no safe, healthy relationship with my partner emotionally. It's just, I've got to build it. And I've got to build it with lots of check-ins, lots of dialogue, lots of noticing. And at any point, I could go into this, this place where it's uncontained. And it is so painful. It is so painful that I've got a matter of hours in most cases where I've got to repair the structure and stabilize it, or I have to leave. And you have no idea how many great partners who, if I had that template where I could be on a gradient, I would have hundreds of friends, and I would have about 10 meaningful people. I'd probably be polyamorous. I'd probably be bisexual, were it not for this limitation. But when I can barely hold it together with one, and I've been lovers with 100 people, and I am not friends with a single one of those amazing people, and it's all this dynamic. I've got to go full off. If we're set, I can't go back to, that's a midpoint. I can't, once I go full on, and everyone that I've had a meaningful relationship with, it's been full on. And they've usually told me things like, this is the best relationship of my life, but it is completely exhausting. I understand. I can't do 3/4. I can't dial down to that point where, you can't just say, I'd like to go to 50% here. And I'm like, sure, I'd love to give you what you want. Let's do 50%. I know what it looks like. I mean, I know how to deconstruct the Lego to 50%. I know exactly how it's built. I can track that more than anyone I've ever met because I have to. It's like breathing. If you got choked and traumatized in your breath to such a point from the age of 0 to 5 that you couldn't count on your lungs to breathe, that's what I'm dealing with emotionally. I can't count on my feelings to regulate. So I'm pulling strings 20 to 1,000 times a day. Conscious choices. Those aren't 1,000 random. Those are moment to moment. No, that one's. I'm scanning and I'm reconstructing a version of a regulated emotional self. And it is exhausting. It's terrifying. And the irony is that because I'm good at that, and I've had to be, women have told me they have never felt so loved in their entire life. And I know exactly what I've done to do that. I've mapped them out the way I've mapped myself out. And I've given them the perfect love following their map that no one's ever given to me. And there's a bitterness around that because they think it's as easy as breathing. They don't see it's a 1,000 construct, with I took this juncture here, I turned that down there, I turned that switch there, I did this up here, I did that right there, I watched your eye flickering, and right when your eye did, I moved that in like that, then I did this, then I did that, and now you feel perfectly loved, and I feel exhausted. That's not seen. And I feel alone, knowing that no one's even aware that that's possible, let alone that I'm living it, and that I'm in a culture where I'm more likely to be rebranded as weird if I talk about some of this. And I have talked to some of my partners about the loneliness that I feel, about all the choreographing that I do to create this sense of grace, where they have the most graceful experience of their life. It just flows for them. It's synchronized and it's easy if it's in this intense terrain. And I'm stitching all that fabric, that smooth fabric. Every one of those is hand-stitched. And I know I've longed for that my entire life. And no one has seen me or seen that they haven't seen me. Or even if they do, their attitude is, yeah, well, I don't want to stitch all those things. And it's like, neither do I. I'd love it if it just flowed. But it doesn't. And life without love is not worth living. So I'm going to kill myself, or I'm going to find a way to craft a sense of artistry in relationship that means something, where I can at least, most of my pleasure actually comes from the pleasure of my partner, most of my joy, because it's not fun stitching 1,000 stitches. But every stitch that I do, I know how it's going to affect my partner. And that makes me happy. But it's also lonely, knowing that no one's in that same place stitching the perfect love for me. They're in entitlement. Some women like, oh, great, a guy, I like this. Yes, I like you. You know how to cook for me. You know how to do this. I like you. sure, I'm willing to show up and be fucked and da-da-da-da, because, I like you. You're worth that much. But you're not worth mapping and stitching and learning psychology and doing this and learning terminology and watching. You're not worth all that. If you want more of that, I'll go on to the next guy. He's happy to fuck me for nothing, And that's very, very sad. Because I also see that while this is a disability, meaning I'm just in emotional survival around this, it's also craft, it's an art that can be elevated, that speaks to the potential. The way I see it is we've got 3 drops in a giant bucket that our cult has facilitated some awareness of. And the entire rest of the bucket, with most of the good stuff in it, has yet to be explored. And we don't know that we don't know that. But I know what we don't know more than almost anyone that I meet, because I have to dip into that bucket for my stitching. I can't afford to be oblivious and be effective. But I'm incredibly impatient with the satisfaction with mediocrity that is expressed in our culture's emotional illiteracy, traumatic illiteracy, physiological illiteracy. We know almost nothing about the human psyche. Nothing. And it's horrifying to understand how big that probability field is. And it's also a very awkward place, because the smartest people that I know understand that I'm very smart. Some of them call me a genius. Some of them call me brilliant. Some of them say, that they learn more, in this terrain with me in a few hours than they have in 10 years of therapy. And I understand what they're talking about, because I haven't met anyone like me. Our culture is so simple that we apply global designations to people. Having decided that I'm a genius or brilliant or whatever, they are completely blind to my incredible limitations. I am more disabled than almost anyone you'll meet as well. And it's paired. And so I'm a complete dick and dysfunctional, to people who at least experience me in my small point. And they just say, what a weird whatever. And so I'm an absolute nothing, and I'm not worth relating to for people who engage in my smallest area, who don't see the big area where I'm at my worst, and they just want nothing to do with me. And they have no idea that there's anything else to the story. And I'm this brilliant genius to this very, very small group of people who is capable and interesting in engaging in this area. It's about 1%. And only 1% of 1%, is really luminous in this terrain. So for 1% of 1%, I'm an incredible find. For 1%, I'm, pretty amazing and, da-da-da. And for 99%, I'm either just largely invisible and, whatever, and just operating unemotionally. And then there's this whole chunk that is quite scared and upset by the fact that they feel something's different about me, but they haven't been taught culturally how to differentiate positive difference and negative difference, or to understand the paradox of the two, that they're interconnected. You can't have an extreme of anything without it being extremely positive or extremely negative in different situations. Take nuclear radiation. If it's in a nuclear power plant and it's powering a city, and you are within the paradigm that electricity is good, well then that radiation is incredible. If it's in your cereal and it's going to kill you in the next 2 weeks, it is horrible. It's the same thing. It's contextual. And my entire, exhausting, lonely endeavor is in a culture that is incredibly ignorant and hostile to anomaly, to inner work, to intense emotions, to this, is to create those 1% contexts in which I can be brilliant and simultaneously avoid 30% of the context that this culture throws at me all the time in which I am completely incompetent because it throws me into gradient terrain that I can't operate in. And nobody is seeing this Herculean task of avoiding 30% of what this cult throws at me daily and selecting 1% that this culture never provides very easily, because I don't want to scare people. I don't want to be in pain, loneliness, and invisibility without love. And the only place where it's not only love, it is ecstatic, it is profound, it is luminous, is in this 1%. And this was also the cosmic joke, the cruelty, the awakening, the horror, of the entire Human Awareness Institute facilitator body, effectively removing one of my prime contexts, which was that, within the Human Awareness Institute workshops, I had a rich vein where the probability of engaging in that 1% went up about 90%, meaning there was a 90% higher probability that a few times in the course of a workshop or hanging out at a community event in certain ways, that I would be able to find a sliver where I could be luminous and masterful and give someone a powerful gift and feel wonderful about that. And have someone say something to me like, wow, this is the best conversation in years, or this, and just say, okay, that will make, that's worth living for another month, another, week, whatever. And yes, I'm paying $1,000 in time off work and stuff to go to an event, to give someone a gift so that I can exist on my terms for a few hours. And of course, the schedule is knocking my body off. The group dynamic is overwhelming my energy at times. All the gray area relationships can be quite difficult for me in that terrain. Running into ex-lovers who I have to be all off with because I can't be all on with is upsetting. I'm not learning new material in the workshops. The workshops are not teaching any of this. And yet I have a couple of hours. And I get to be myself. The me that I relate to without all this trauma, without this biology, without the grief, without the terror, and without the dysfunction, and without the invisibility that I would be all the time. That this is me. And I get to be it 1% of the time, in a giving capacity primarily. But I receive an enormous amount through the joy and etc. in people's faces. And when that got effectively taken away, as a fallout of the Human Awareness Institute facilitators said that the abuse, etc., was not a high issue, encouraged me to keep it secret, etc. This creates a problem because it's not ethical. That's not how you treat human beings. And I tried to connect with them in this terrain where I'm brilliant, but it got too close to their shame, their fear. And so I re-experienced the childhood abuse dynamic of superior mass and superior force, taking me into this place of insanity, of grief, of addiction, of pain, of misery. And just, we're not going to deal with it. And we're not going to ask how we could help, how we could make it easy for you. We're not going to do what you say you need. Like so many people, that they're, as soon as I say I need this, they're like, well, you can't tell me what to do. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. I'm just saying if you will move into this position, which I only generally relate to people capable of doing that, because that's one reason I avoid young people. I could give a shit about breast size and all that. I need someone who's not going to fall apart in full-on intensity, or who's not going to go into deep shame and inadequacy. That happens a lot. Because they feel out of their depth in some of this terrain. I can become quite intuitive, quite aware. I really see people deeply in order to do this navigation. And some people are terrified of being seen. I'm not. I love being seen. And, it's quite a pulling teeth type of thing to get someone, see me here, see me here, see me here. Look, you didn't notice that. You didn't notice that. You didn't regulate that. Because I'm mapping that all, with these little efforts, 1,000 times a day, I'm so aware when other people are not. And they ding me, and it's all rather aggravated because, there's so much trauma in that terrain, and my body is so fried from all the anxiety and the grief and the loneliness and all that. And so, so I've been bringing relationships that I would love to be in to off because I don't like pushing people and they can't go to on. And then they immediately run off into horrendous stories about how they're inadequate. And none of them are true, except for the one story nobody tells, that they're inadequate for not caring enough about the relationship in me to let me speak and to see me and to have humility. Their humility to understand me is inadequate. The humility to be open to the unknown is inadequate as a direct result of a shame-based culture that's terrified of the unknown, because every trauma-based culture is terrified of the unknown above all else. So as soon as you start taking someone into unfamiliar terrain psychically and energetically, they don't like it. Peter Sandhill didn't like it when I started showing him things about himself. They're very easy to see, but very uncomfortable for him to be seen. So he, started putting up, little blocks and putting the power and denying. That's